Hi everyone, this is Liz Striegel, presenting my research proposal. My research proposal focuses on subminimum wage policy and asks the question, how has integrated employment influenced subminimum wage policy? So a little bit of background as to why this is such an important issue to look at. Over 1 billion people, which is approximately 15% of the world's population, live with some form of disability. One obstacle that these persons face is being provided the opportunity to fully function in the workplace. As of October 2014, the U.S. Department of Labor reported that only 20% of the American workforce is made up of individuals with disabilities, and that 11.3% of individuals with disabilities are unemployed, compared to only 5.3% of individuals without disabilities who are unemployed. The history of workers with disabilities in the workplace has a varied history. Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed in 1938. It has been in effect since then, and really can be viewed as an out-of-date law. The law allows employers, after receiving a certificate from the Department of Labor, to pay subminimum wages to workers who have disabilities for the work being performed. A subminimum wage is defined as a wage less than the federal minimum wage that is based on a worker's individual productivity and that is commensurate to the prevailing wage for that job in that general geographic area. There's great debate on whether it's justifiable that workers with disabilities can be paid below the federal minimum wage. Theoretically, Section 14C promotes the belief that competitive employers will not be discouraged from hiring workers with disabilities if they're able to pay a wage equivalent to the worker's productivity. But opponents argue that a federal minimum wage is just that, a minimum wage, and that no American worker should be paid less regardless of their disability. As I mentioned, this policy really is not related to more recent laws relating to workers with disabilities. Laws such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act, and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act are all examples of policies that work to integrate workers with disabilities into the general workforce and to have those workers with disabilities working alongside workers without disabilities at wages that are not below the minimum wage. So my research question is, how has integrated employment influenced subminimum wage policy? That first required a literature review. There's not a lot of research that focuses on Section 14C and how effective it has been over the years. So I focused on existing research regarding the employment of workers with disabilities. This research provided insight into many different factors that all affect the employment of individuals with disabilities, existing wage disparities between those with and without disabilities, as well as the impact of different state approaches and commitments to integrated employment for workers with disabilities. These factors were evaluated by two very different indicators. The first was economic data, where they analyzed wage earnings and employment trends. And the second was social indicators, which looked at transition services that workers with disabilities receive, their education levels, their social skills, and any family involvement that they might have. So looking at my research proposal specifically, again, I'm asking how integrated employment has influenced the subminimum wage policy. I first found it important to define those two terms. Subminimum wage policy is defined as the Section 14C program, which is the federal provision that authorizes employers to pay workers with disabilities less than the minimum wage. And then integrated employment, which is also a Department of Labor term, refers to jobs held by individuals in typical workplace settings where the majority of persons employed are not persons with disabilities. And in these jobs, individuals with disabilities earn wages consistent with wages paid workers without disabilities, and they are paid directly by the employer. So in this research project, the identified independent variables include the type of employer holding a Section 14C certificate, the number of times a Section 14C certificate has been renewed, and the number of Section 14C certificate applications received by the U.S. Department of Labor. These variables will help identify how effective the Section 14C program has been and whether integrated employment has overtaken segregated employment as the preferred method of employment of workers with disabilities. Section 14C employer data can be downloaded from the U.S. Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division website. Currently, only Section 14C data from 2013 is available for download, but it can be expected that archive data is available upon request and that 2014 data will be posted near the end of the year. Data related to 2 of the 3 independent variables will be provided from the Wage and Hour download: the type of employer holding a Section 14C certificate and the number of times a Section 14C certificate has been renewed. First, when an employer applies for a Section 14 certificate, they are categorized into one of 4 certificate types: Work Center, Business, School Work Exploration Program, or Hospital Residential Care Facility. The wage and hour data is already categorized by the certificate type, and each type is defined by the Department of Labor. Further, once all 10 years of certificate data is downloaded from the Wage and Hour Division website, an analysis of employer names and/or employer identification numbers will indicate the number of times an employer has renewed its Section 14C certificate. The number of Section 14C applications received by the U.S. Department of Labor, and that's on a per-year basis, will be more difficult to gather. That data is not publicly available, and it is most likely that a Freedom of Information Act request would have to be filed to obtain this data. The Section 14C data can be analyzed using a regression analysis. Specifically, a multiple regression analysis would be the most effective tool. Understanding the simultaneous impact of the identified variables on the dependent variable, which again is the effectiveness of the Section 14C program or the utilization of integrated employment, will provide for the best analysis. For example, it can be expected that the type of employer versus the number of times a subminimum wage certificate is renewed will be telling. Businesses that continue to utilize a subminimum wage certificate may be indicative of the program's effectiveness in integrated employment, whereas if community rehabilitation programs continue to renew certificates, it may be indicative that employees are not being transitioned to integrated employment. Further, if the U.S. Department of Labor has seen a decrease in the number of Section 14C applications, it could be theorized that subminimum wages are being utilized less and more workers with disabilities are being placed in integrated employment. But the opposite may be true if there has been an increase in Section 14C applications. The number of applications could also be broken down by type of employer submitting an application, which could strengthen the conclusion regarding whether or not the majority of workers with disabilities remain in segregated subminimum wage employment or are transitioning to integrated employment. So I hope that this research project will hopefully spark a new section of research that examines whether subminimum wage policy actually incentivizes employers to employ workers with disabilities, or whether it discourages the integration of workers with disabilities into the workforce. I think that future research on this topic could analyze the differences in wages, employment history, and overall attitudes of workers with disabilities who receive subminimum wages and those who are in integrated employment. Also, the ages and turnover rates of Section 14C employees would be interesting. That could indicate whether workers with disabilities transition out of subminimum wage employment or whether they enter said employment at a young age and continue to work in segregated employment for extended periods of time. Section 14C continues to kind of be a hot topic. It can be viewed as a civil rights issue for workers with disabilities and within the disability community. So I don't expect it to be an issue that will go away anytime soon, and it could certainly benefit from additional research that could either prove its worth or encourage policy in a different direction that would continue to benefit workers with disabilities. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment underneath this video. And I look forward to also seeing what everyone else has been working on this semester. Thank you.